Environmental concerns have always been a popular reason for efforts to hinder SpaceX Starship's progress. Last year, the FAA grounded the rocket for months, primarily due to the damage to the launch pad caused by the explosion during Starship's inaugural flight. This year, history almost repeated itself due to concerns about the potential impact of a sonic boom during Super Heavy's re-entry. To solve the persistent problem, in addition to the paper battle, Elon Musk's company should not rule out the possibility of another technical solution to landing the rocket booster. Find out everything in today's TechMap episode. But before we begin, let's subscribe to the channel to stay up to date with the latest space news. SpaceX's Starship Flight 5 has recently made headlines by being delayed 2 months due to the FAA's regulation. Instead of the time frame in mid-September that the FAA previously targeted for determining whether to approve a launch license for the next Starship flight, Flight 5 won't happen no earlier than late November. The primary reason is SpaceX's modification for the next Starship test flight, which requires consultation with other agencies. The FAA, in a separate statement on September 11th, noted that the license the FAA issued for Starship's previous launch in June allowed for multiple flights using the same profile, but SpaceX modified the profile for the next launch and also provided information only in mid-August about how the environmental impact of Flight 5 will cover a larger area than previously reviewed. One of those changes is that the booster itself will return to land back on shore in Texas, rather than off the coast in the Gulf of Mexico, as it did in June, which will expose a larger area to a sonic boom. Thus, the FAA has to approve another 60-day consultation with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to look at the sonic boom's effect on animals, according to SpaceX. In addition, there was concern about wastewater discharge from the pad's water deluge system, leading to the fines by the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality and the Environmental Protection Agency this year. But in SpaceX's words, they were entirely tied to disagreements over paperwork and not any dumping of pollutants in water from the launch pad into the environment around the Starship launch site. The FAA's explanation comes after criticism from SpaceX, which said the delay was not based on new safety concerns, but instead on unnecessary environmental analysis. Otherwise, the FAA said SpaceX could use the same launch license used for the fourth launch if the company employed the same vehicle configuration and mission profile. Of course, it doesn't totally fit SpaceX's goal to progress over each flight. Especially, they need to make Starship reliable as soon as possible to keep up with the tight timeline of the national missions, NASA's Artemis 3, for instance. Anyway, the hope now is that both the FAA and Fish and Wildlife, etc., can take less than 60 days to finish their evaluation. It's a big deal because, as FAA is well known for the slow processing of launch license applications and lack of resources for oversight of commercial space activity. Or SpaceX could come up with another solution to decrease the FAA's concerns about the potential impact of the sonic boom during Super Heavy's return in the future. As you might know, besides the idea of using chopstick, there are another 2 landing scenarios. It's landing on a drone ship, a floating platform in the ocean. This method has become a SpaceX trademark with the Falcon 9's boosters, and for Starship, it promises flexibility in landing site selection. Landing on a drone ship allows SpaceX to easily position and recover the launch vehicle, especially during missions far from shore. The final option, known as controlled soft landing, serves as a backup in case the other methods aren't feasible. This is a destructive scenario where the rocket is intentionally landed in the ocean and is not recovered. SpaceX successfully tested a soft landing during Starship's 4th flight by the Virtual Tower, and landing on Mechazilla's arms is a familiar concept and a must-achieve goal for SpaceX. So what if we combine those 2 options? At this point, the booster can land on a floating platform in the Gulf of Mexico somewhere, assuming that SpaceX built a Mechazilla tower on said platform, and likely on a larger drone ship than is currently used for the Falcon 9 first stage. A conventional launch mission will leave the stage with close to as little fuel as possible by the time it detaches in order to be efficient, but it does not make sense to waste a significant amount of fuel, up to 10%, to make that return to Boca Chica. That number matters while 80% of the fuel is consumed in the first place, and the booster just has 20% remaining for in-flight activities. An advantage of an autonomous spaceport drone ship, ASDS, is the vessel can be positioned near the spaceport, so it's far cheaper to bring the rocket back on a ship than to fly it back with fuel. So they can load only as much fuel as they will need to deliver the payload and then mostly fall and glide for a powered landing on the barge. Thanks to that, the rocket's payload capacity is also enhanced considerably. However, one challenge challenge here is the ocean's instability, so the rocket is usually affected by ocean waves and other unpredictable sea factors. Thus, the success rate of landing on a drone ship is hard to match with return to the launch site, RTLS, where the landing pad is on solid ground. Furthermore, with the growing size of Super Heavy, it would need a very tall catching structure, which would itself need to be afloat and subject to the vagaries of wave motion, as well as the tough weather conditions, so it would probably need a very large barge indeed to keep it stable, unlike relatively shallow water barges and platforms that can be anchored in or supported from the seabed. Perhaps a deep ocean platform is also an interesting option. For example, Chevron's $500 million Petronius platform is situated about 208 kilometers southeast of New Orleans. It is located in water depths of 535 meters. The rig is a compliant tower and is the largest freestanding structure in the world at 613 meters, double the Eiffel Tower. The compliant tower design was chosen for its ability to withstand hurricane conditions and operate in depths of 610 meters. The compliant tower design enables it to move within an envelope of 7.6 meters sway and a 3 meters rotation sway at the surface. Nevertheless, landing the boosters on a drone ship offers other massive benefits, such as flexibility. As a mobile structure, the drone ship can be positioned anywhere in the ocean as long as they don't interfere with other maritime operations. It can serve for suborbital missions, including point-to-point travel on Earth and military and civilian missions. SpaceX is able to select the most optimal landing sites for each specific mission. Remember, oceans cover a total of 71% of the Earth's surface, so nothing would be better if there were available locations for launching and landing a Starship anywhere in the world. This is useful for Starship suborbital missions, which require transporting large numbers of people and cargo over great distances in short periods. Gwynne Shotwell, president and COO of SpaceX, hinted at this during a press conference following her presentation at the FAA Commercial Space Transportation Conference on February 8, 2023. We're going to have a lot of launch pads. I think we're going to have a lot of platforms at sea. We need to see how this vehicle is going to perform. A typical case illustrating SpaceX's ambitions to have a lot of floating platforms worldwide is the company's plan to add one more landing site on Australia's coast and recover it on Australian territory. The launch site remains a SpaceX facility in Texas. This initiative represents a potential expansion of SpaceX's operations in the region, which aligns with broader security and military cooperation between the U.S. and Australia. To facilitate this plan, there is a need to loosen U.S. export controls on advanced space technologies destined for Australia. This adjustment is crucial for ensuring compliance with regulations governing the transfer of sensitive technologies. According to the sources, discussions are in the early stages regarding expanded possibilities. The sources also indicate that towing Starship to a nearby port on Australia's western or northern coasts after an ocean landing or barge landing would be the ideal scenario. However, this also poses some challenges due to the huge size of the rocket. Thus, more specific plans and locations are still being determined as the talks are ongoing. Your top priority is safety. All you want to do is make life multi-planetary for the future of humanity. You are going to rescue 2 NASA astronauts stranded in space. And you think the government will love you for that? No, the world doesn't operate in this way. If you have nothing for their political benefit, they will find ways to destroy you until you are broken. Indeed, just days ago, the FAA announced a 2-month delay to Starship Flight 5 due to paperwork issues as the SpaceX team was getting ready to launch. On September 17, they continued to make it difficult by fining SpaceX $633,009 for 2 Falcon 9 launches that, were launched last year for license requirements. What the heck is that? I can't believe they have to go back a year and fine SpaceX for stupid violations. Rather than speed up, the FAA is trying to slow down SpaceX. Oh my godness. Okay, I know that their priority is always safety, and even FAA Chief Counsel Mark Nichols also explains on FAA's website why SpaceX is fined. As quoted, safety drives everything we do at the FAA, including a legal responsibility for the safety oversight of companies with commercial space transportation licenses. Failure of a company to comply with the safety requirements will result in consequences. Dear FAA, as you said, safety drives everything you do. So why were you too hands-off in the oversight of a plane maker company leading to serious incidents? Or have you ever considered fining someone who sent up a spacecraft that left 2 American astronauts at the ISS because it wasn't safe enough for them to take home? This is a surprising thing not only for all of us, but also for Elon Musk himself.
Hey, what happened?
Amazingly, no Starliner fines for Boeing. He tweets, "The FAA Space Division is harassing SpaceX about nonsense that doesn't affect safety, while giving a free pass to Boeing even after NASA concluded that their spacecraft was not safe enough to bring back the astronauts." Throughout the tweet, Elon Musk strongly criticizes a double standard in regulatory enforcement. Despite NASA's findings indicating that Boeing's spacecraft was not safe enough for astronaut transport, the FAA has not imposed fines or penalties on Boeing. In contrast, SpaceX has faced scrutiny from the FAA over various issues that some perceive as trivial and unrelated to safety. The FAA's too hands-off oversight of Boeing has made its headlines for a while, especially since the incident during a January 5th flight of an Alaska Airlines Boeing 737 MAX as a door plug blowout, which led to emergency landings and raised serious safety alarms. FAA Chief Mike Whitaker admitted that his agency is partly responsible for the safety problems at Boeing and that it had been too hands-off in its oversight of the troubled aircraft manufacturer. The incident prompted an increase in FAA inspectors at Boeing facilities, indicating a shift towards more direct and rigorous oversight. This is one part of the FAA's efforts, under Whitaker, to initiate a comprehensive review of its oversight processes. However, I feel like it's more of a nominal oversight because the Boeing Starliner still continuously met serious troubles in its crew flight test this year. And of course, the FAA so far has not given any comment about this. This carelessness is threatening directly to NASA's contractor, Boeing, and affecting the FAA's reputation more than ever. According to Spaceflight Now, to work towards Starliner certification, in addition to looking at the path forward for Starliner, NASA will also look back to see how they could have caught some of the anomalies during the development and qualification processes. With a process full of loopholes on the Starliner's project, well, I'm afraid it will take them a long time to check, fix, discuss, debate, blah blah. As a result, the longer it takes, the greater the loss Boeing will incur. The FAA's situation is also not better, as its administrator Mike Whitaker will testify on September 24th before the House Transportation Committee regarding Boeing's ongoing quality control problems. Whitaker had previously given Boeing 90 days to address systemic issues and will testify again on September 25th before the Senate about the FAA's oversight of Boeing. Hopefully, the public will get valuable information from the hearing instead of a boring answer, like, "is still under investigation and I can't comment on that." Frankly, congressional hearings have not only focused on these immediate incidents, but also on the systemic issues within Boeing's production and safety culture. There's a growing call for accountability, with some advocating for Boeing executives' compensation to be linked to the production of defect-free aircraft, reflecting public and legislative frustration over safety and quality lapses. The testimony and subsequent actions could lead to significant changes in how the FAA oversees aircraft manufacturers, possibly shifting from a model where much of the certification process is self-regulated by companies like Boeing to a more hands-on approach by the FAA. Nevertheless, for Elon Musk, the process change is not enough. More importantly, we need a purification within the FAA leadership. There need to be resignations from the FAA leadership, he wrote. For a watchdog group, the purification should also happen inside NASA and even the government. According to Fox News, a conservative watchdog group, the Oversight Project, has filed a lawsuit against NASA seeking access to communications involving Vice President Kamala Harris, who serves as the chair of the National Space Council, NSPC. The lawsuit arises amid concerns about the prolonged stay of astronauts Butch Wilmore and Sunita Williams at the International Space Station, and allegations that Harris prioritized political considerations over astronaut safety. This looks like to me and other experts that Kamala Harris, the space czar, chose politics over our astronauts, Mike Howell, head of the project, said, inferring that there may have been a political calculation against bringing astronauts Butch Wilmore and Sunita Williams home as planned. In its filing, the Oversight Project seeks to compel NASA to share correspondence from Agency Chief of Staff Bale Dalton III, Associate Administrator James Free, and 5 other senior officials. It also seeks communications between NASA and officials in the Commercial Crew Program program at Boeing. On X, Howell listed the curriculum vitae of a handful of NASA hires made, while Harris has led the National Space Council, including a veteran of New York County District Attorney Alvin Bragg's office, another from the Jacksonville Symphony, and an individual whose scientific major was political science. In this way, Mike Howell points his finger on the correspondence of a political nature between NASA, the vice president's camp, and/or Boeing. Space is serious business. Kamala Harris obviously has no business running the National Space Council. They're lost in space right now. Part of the reason they're lost in space is that our NASA has been turned into another woke DEI, dismal excuse for a government agency, he said. As Starliner approached the space station in June, 5 of 28 control thrusters on Starliner's service module failed. Ground teams also detected 4 small helium leaks on Starliner's propulsion system soon after its launch, along with the one before launch. Although engineers recovered 4 of the 5 thrusters, this cannot able to convince NASA's decision makers that the same problem wouldn't reappear or get worse when Starliner returned. Even to ensure safety, Starliner's departure from the station was also set to be different from what was originally planned when it would have astronauts on board. This helps to minimize stress on the thrusters, particularly the aft-facing ones that had experienced problems in June. What a pity. Despite the efforts of the engineers, the capricious ship continued to misbehave with a couple of fresh technical problems. One of the thrusters did not fire as expected as Starliner was backing away from the station. During the 58-second deorbit burn, 2 RCS thrusters got hotter than expected but did not fail. One of 12 separate thrusters on the crew module also did not work in tests before re-entry. Those thrusters are a different design from those on the service module, and it wasn't clear why it failed. A redundant thruster, though, did operate normally and did not pose a problem during re-entry. Although the uncrewed journey was not perfect, NASA has said it could still be possible to certify Starliner for regular crew rotation missions, even though it didn't bring Wilmore and Williams home. After 5 days of staying in orbit, SpaceX's Polaris Dawn crew is finally home, wrapping up a history-making mission. The Crew Dragon capsule, carrying 4 astronauts, landed off the coast of Dry Tortugas, Florida, at 3:37 a.m. ET on Sunday, September 15th. The mission made history as it reached a higher altitude than any human has traveled in 5 decades, completed the first spacewalk from Dragon, tested Starlink in space, and conducted roughly 40 science experiments. A spacewalk conducted early Thursday morning also marked the first time such an endeavor has been completed by a privately funded and operated mission. Billionaire Jared Isaacman, then SpaceX engineer Sarah Gillis, became the first 2 civilians to conduct such an excursion in space. They were tethered to the Crew Dragon spacecraft in the vacuum of space, while 2 others watched from inside, more than 400 miles above Earth. Furthermore, it also marks the first time SpaceX's brand new spacesuit, the EVA suit, is tested in space, especially in a harsh environment like the Van Allen radiation belt. Everything goes smoothly, including testing slim spacesuits, a process to fully depressurize the Crew Dragon cabin, and doing the uninterrupted video call between astronauts in orbit with SpaceX teams back on Earth via Starlink technologies that could be used in future private space missions. The smooth transmission through the Starlink network at such a far distance will pave the way for strong interplanetary connections in the future. A brighter future makes Elon say, "Cool." Even the re-entry journey of Crew Dragon Resilience is deemed to be among the most dangerous stretches of any space mission. A safely reaching home requires a phase called deorbit burn, orienting itself as it prepares to slice through the thickest part of Earth's atmosphere. The spacecraft then reached extremely hot temperatures, up to 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit, caused by the pressure and friction due to hitting the air while still traveling around 17,000 miles per hour. That is where the Crew Dragon's heat shield, which is located on the bottom of the 13-foot wide capsule, comes in. Thanks to that, the crew remained at comfortable temperatures inside the capsule. Polaris crew is home safe and sound, Elon Musk proudly announced as a way to implicitly reaffirm the reliability and safety of the SpaceX Dragon spacecraft. At present, SpaceX's Dragon has been the sole American spacecraft capable of safely transporting astronauts to and from the International Space Station, ISS. In addition to the regular missions, the spacecraft is also trusted by NASA in particular, and people in general, to carry out rescue missions for astronauts stuck on the ISS. Next February, under the Crew 9 9 mission. The Dragon capsule will take charge to bring home NASA astronauts Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams, who are unable to return to Earth aboard Boeing Starliner as planned. SpaceX's success further underscores the incompetence of rival Boeing, which has made its headlines since the early days of NASA's Commercial Crew Program. The Commercial Crew Program that kicked off in 2014 witnessed Boeing pull ahead of SpaceX with $4.2 billion in funding, nearly doubling the $2.6 billion of its rival. This could be due to Boeing's lobbying efforts and its enormous political influence in Washington, according to sources. The skepticism becomes even more evident when we put two vehicles, Boeing and Dragon, into comparison. Boeing's spacecraft consists of a reusable capsule and an expendable service module designed for missions to low Earth orbit. The capsule has a diameter of 15 feet, which is slightly larger than the Apollo command module that went to the Moon and the SpaceX Crew Dragon, but smaller than the Artemis Orion capsule that's designed to go much further into space. Starliner can hold a crew of up to 7 people and can remain docked to the ISS for up to 7 months. It features a traditional cockpit with physical buttons and switches, offering a familiar interface for astronauts used to legacy spacecraft. The service module includes 4 Rocketdyne RS-88 engines, burning hypergolic propellants, which will be used for launch escape in the event of an abort. Starliner is also designed to deliver up to 5,500 pounds of pressurized cargo and 3,300 pounds of unpressurized cargo. On the other hand, the Crew Dragon, consisting of a reusable capsule and an integrated trunk, is designed for missions to low Earth orbit and beyond. The capsule has a diameter of 13 feet, making it slightly smaller than Boeing's Starliner and the Artemis Orion capsule. Like Starliner, Dragon can hold a crew of up to 7 people and can remain docked on the ISS for up to 7 months. What makes SpaceX's pet impressive is its state-of-the-art interior. The cockpit features modern touchscreens and few physical controls, providing an advanced interface for astronauts not unlike the minimalist interior of a Tesla. Solar panels are mounted on the trunk, providing up to 5 kilowatts of electricity. The capsule includes 8 Super Draco engines burning hypergolic propellants, which provide launch escape capability in the event of an abort. Despite being smaller than the Calypso, the smart design allows Dragon to deliver up to 13,228 pounds of combined pressurized and unpressurized cargo, significantly larger than Starliner. Accompanying the modern and smart design, SpaceX Dragon offers an attractive price tag, between $55 and $72 million cost per seat. In contrast, Boeing blackmailed NASA into paying $90 million to have a seat on Starliner, significantly higher than $86 million for Soyuz. At this point, bear in mind that the original purpose of the Commercial Crew Program was to get rid of dependence on Russia's Soyuz, especially within the context that Roscosmos heavily increased the ticket price of the Soyuz spacecraft. In recent years, Soyuz's cost per seat has risen to as high as $86 million. Of course, the old design and expensive price aren't the only drawbacks of CST-100. For a decade, the troubled vehicle was notorious for a series of technical glitches, leading to numerous delays and failures. It's unfathomable that so far, the spacecraft has only completed 3 test flights and has yet to be certificated for human rating. Meanwhile, Dragon has gone into operation for 4 years and has undergone 8 operational crewed missions under NASA's contract. The first crewed flight, Demo 2, took place in May 2020, successfully transporting astronauts to the ISS and marking the first crewed orbital launch from the United States since the end of the Space Shuttle program in 2011. Starliner's first effort was the 2019 Uncrewed Boeing Orbital Flight Test, OF, which failed to reach the International Space Station due to several software issues. After the flight, there were up to 80 corrective actions to be addressed on the spacecraft before attempting another unmanned test flight in 2022. In May 2022, the second Uncrewed Flight Test, or OFT-2, successfully docked with the ISS after resolving valve corrosion problems caused by nitrogen tetroxide interaction. However, this time a new problem emerged. 2 orbital maneuvering and attitude control thrusters failed during the orbital insertion burn. A couple of RCS thrusters used to maneuver Starliner also failed during docking due to low chamber pressure. Some thermal systems used to cool the spacecraft showed extra cold temperatures, requiring engineers to manage it during the docking. Despite 2 previous failures, Boeing Boeing still qualified for a third flight test, the Boeing Crew Flight Test, CFT, which was originally planned as the capsule's final test before entering regular service. To make matters even more complicated, the CFT was delayed by 7 years, from originally scheduled in 2017 to June 5, 2024. The main culprits are numerous technical issues, including the parachute harness, flammable tape-on wiring, and a helium leak in the service module. The June launch also didn't go smoothly with the thruster glitches and helium leaks. A joint NASA-Boeing team spent weeks trying to fix the issue, which resulted in the Starliner having to stay on the ISS longer than expected, but the issues are still not fully understood. The Calypso's return on the 7th of September is described as a hollow victory for the crisis-hit company, as there was no crew on board and more propulsion problems were discovered during the flight. That means Starliner failed to successfully complete its test flight, raising concerns that another test flight may be needed. At 700 kilometers above Earth, SpaceX has demonstrated its new extravehicular activity, EVA spacesuits, during Thursday's historic SpaceX spacewalk. The mission took place higher than any previous NASA spacewalk and featured cutting-edge technology. The 106-minute spacewalk witnessed Polaris's commander, Jared Isaacman, and mission specialist Sarah Gillis separately exit the spacecraft and individually perform a series of suit mobility demonstrations to test the performance of the spacesuit in the vacuum environment of space. Mission pilot Kid Petit and mission specialist Anna Menon remained seated, managing suit umbilicals and monitoring vital support systems and telemetry on Dragon's displays. The data gathered from the test will be the vital stepping stone for SpaceX's big ambitions for the suit. The company aims to improve its technology and make the suit more manufacturable with each generation. The ultimate goal is that you can put on the spacesuit and go out and get work done anywhere in the solar system and not feel like you're wearing anything more than you normally wear every day, Chris Trigg, SpaceX's senior manager for spacesuits, said. To make it possible, engineers had to focus on modernizing the suit since the first generation. According to SpaceX, the new EVA astronaut suits are more innovative and an overall improvement from SpaceX's previous ones. It's kind of like a suit of armor made of fabric, SpaceX principal spacesuit engineer Eric Krause says in a new video the company posted to X. The video also gives us more details about the suit, such as new features, including enhanced mobility through new joints, a helmet and visor with a display, and a fabric-based material for ease of manufacturing. While based on the IVA suit, the EVA suit's soft portions become rigid when pressurized, requiring flexure and rotational joints for ease of movement. This aims to avoid making the suit become something like NASA's traditional suits whose comfort is not the concern, astronaut survival is. By contrast, for SpaceX, the comfort also plays a vital role, as Elon Musk used to share, as quote,
"Because if you just inflate the suit, you're just basically, you're kind of like one of those balloons at a party or something, So it's quite hard to still be mobile in an inflated suit and have the joints move and stuff." And
this difference largely stems from their intended purposes and the environments they are designed for. NASA's spacesuits, particularly the Extravehicular Mobility Unit, EMU, are designed primarily for short-duration spacewalks, extravehicular activities, or EVAs, in low Earth orbit, such as those conducted at the International Space Station. On the other hand, SpaceX's vision includes supporting missions that may involve longer durations on other planets, such as Mars. This requires a suit that can accommodate the physical demands of extended wear and various activities, making comfort a priority. There are many challenges in designing such types of suits, so testing the suit should be the focus of the entire privately funded 5-day mission. Moreover, maintaining the suit under suitable pressure also aims to protect them from ironic situations. A typical example is the case of the Soviet cosmonaut Alexei Leonov, who was the first person to walk in space and spent 12 minutes outside his spacecraft on the 18th of March 1965. His mission showed some of the risks associated with designing spacesuits. By the end of the spacewalk, Leonov's suit had inflated in the vacuum of space to the point where he could no longer fit back in the airlock. He had to manually release air to get inside. Another feature of the SpaceX brand new suit is the additional Faraday layer, or a conductive cage, around the suit that shields it from external electric fields. SpaceX's Chris Trigg stated that one more issue is crew thermal comfort during EVAs. The suit will be exposed to an extreme thermal environment, and the suit's interior must be ensured to be comfortable and safe to touch. The helmet features a heads-up display with a transparent screen. This provides critical telemetry to the crew, including pressure, temperature, and relative humidity, without obstructing the astronaut's view. It also features coatings for astronaut safety. The EVA suit visor is made of polycarbonate and is coated with copper and ICO, or indium tenoxide, said Krauss in the video. These two coatings together reflect the sun away from the crew, as well as reflecting infrared heat back to the crew when they are facing deep space. Not only the Polaris team and SpaceX enthusiasts, but also astronauts are very interested in Thursday's suit test. Retired astronaut Chris Hadfield recalled his own experience walking in space and the suit he wore, models that would be considered outdated today.
The space suit that I wore for my first two spacewalks was old. I mean, it was designed in the 60s and built in the early 80s, so 40 years old. This one, they've used latest of manufacturing techniques right from the beginning, integrating everything together, trying to make it as simple for the crew as possible.
The Canadian astronaut added the new SpaceX EVA suits are easy to get on and off and are made flexible, so movement is easier. Tim Peake, the last British astronaut to go into space, said on X that it would be very interesting to hear the crew's full feedback on the new EVA suit mobility, something he said was incredibly important yet hard to achieve, especially fingertip fidelity. He added, "Elbow mobility looks great though." All of these enhancements to the EVA suit are part of a scalable design, allowing teams to produce and scale to different body types, as SpaceX seeks to create greater accessibility to space for all of humanity. Building a base on the Moon and a city on Mars will require millions of spacesuits. The development of this suit and the execution of the spacewalk will be important steps toward a scalable design for spacesuits on future long-duration missions as life becomes multiplanetary. To put it simply, if SpaceX's suit can endure a dangerous place like Van Allen, then radiation on the Moon or Mars won't be a problem for them. The four-person Polaris Dawn mission launched early September 10th morning, with the goal of making some spaceflight history. The Polaris Dawn mission is the second that Isaac Mann has funded. He has declined to give the price, but the missions are estimated to cost hundreds of millions of dollars. In 2021, the private pilot and now trained astronaut who made millions from his electronic payment company Shift4 flew on the Inspiration 4 mission, the first orbital spaceflight by an all-civilian crew. That mission included a cancer survivor as well as a data engineer who won his seat in a raffle draw. Elon Musk's SpaceX has operated both missions and sees them as major milestones in making access to space easier and cheaper. Musk plans to take astronauts back to the Moon and eventually to Mars. His company is developing the largest and most powerful rocket ever built, called Starship, and has carried out 4 test flights of the 120-meter-tall system. The next is due in November. The mission's 4th day includes a Starlink demonstration. The Polaris Dawn crew has teased an exciting surprise message they intend to transmit down to Earth via SpaceX's mega constellation of internet satellites. Day 5 of Polaris Dawn will be spent preparing for the return journey home, provided all the other mission goals have been achieved by this point. The crew members will also conduct about 40 science experiments during the mission. Polaris Dawn's Dragon is expected to splash down 6 days after liftoff, performing a final series of deorbit burns on a return trajectory for terra firma. If everything goes according to plan, the Polaris Dawn crew will parachute into the ocean in one of a handful of potential landing zones off the coast of Florida, where a recovery ship will retrieve the spacecraft and crew. While some would like to argue that Polaris Dawn is merely a billionaire's joyride, the truth is the Polaris team has reaped many things that have never been done before and demonstrated to NASA how wrong the agency was in looking down the potential of private missions. Certainly, you may remember that in 2022, Jared Isaacman, sponsoring Polaris Dawn, basically said he'd foot the bill to take a maintenance crew aboard SpaceX Dragon to NASA's Space Hubble telescope. After 3 decades of serving as a prime observer in space, NASA's Hubble telescope alarms that it will retire around 2034. That's when the telescope, which is slowly drifting down toward Earth, is expected to burn up as it plunges through the atmosphere. Within the Polaris Dawn framework, he would partner with SpaceX to perform a boost to Hubble and possibly service it like NASA used to do, all for free. This aims to buy the telescope more operational time. However, NASA officials and study reviewers are not yet sold on the need for it. This mainly comes from the high risk of the mission, including the technical concern. The SpaceX capsule has no airlock. Once the astronauts step outside, the entire interior will have to be depressurized and exposed to the vacuum of space when the hatch opens. NASA, by then, raised the skepticism about the reliability of SpaceX's new EVA suit. No robotic arm is also a big deal. This component was equipped on the Space Shuttle, helping to retrieve the telescope and firmly mount the instrument onto a platform in the shuttle's huge cargo bay. The astronaut could use this platform to revolve and position the telescope to make their spacewalking easier. Dragons do not have such parts, so they will float in space and make work difficult. Furthermore, it can cause fatal accidents for astronauts in risky environments like space. In terms of humans, NASA supposed that a new and private mission like Polaris had not been proven. The agency is very familiar with the Hubble rescue missions, with the dedicated vehicle and experienced astronauts. Not by accident, why the 5 Hubble servicing missions flown by NASA astronauts were some of the most prestigious space missions ever. Clearly, they do not dare to risk its expensive telescope on a new and private mission like Polaris. The failure could threaten Hubble's 10 more years of science that astronomers currently expect to enjoy. But now NASA might change its mind. Greg Autry, an American space policy expert and also an author of books such as Red Moon Rising, A New Entrepreneurial Dynamic, or Death by China, has recently given his own thoughts. So who still believes that Rook Isaacman couldn't successfully service the Hubble Space Telescope on a SpaceX mission? Previous arguments, including Hubble's relatively high altitude and the lack of spacesuits and spacewalk experience on Dragon, were just smashed. The private mission took our spaceship farther than any human has gone since the last Apollo mission over 50 years ago. It reached the Van Allen radiation belt at altitudes about 700 kilometers, whereas Hubble orbits the Earth at an altitude of about 547 kilometers. They tested SpaceX's brand new spacesuit in space carefully, because this is the suit's first generation, which is only used for test, so we should not expect perfection from it. The data collected from the test will form the basis for the development of future versions, which will certainly be much better. However, at least it can meet the basic requirements of an astronaut suit, such as safety, not to mention that the SpaceX suit has several advantages over NASA's Apollo suit, among which is flexibility. It stands out by the new joint designs remaining soft until pressurized, while maintaining mobility, which is really decent dexterity in the fingers, very good mobility, and good flexibility, even down to the knees and waist. Obviously, for difficult, highly skilled tasks like repairing Hubble, the flexibility of the SpaceX suit would increase the wearer's mobility and reduce danger. On the other hand, given Hubble's value, it's no surprise that NASA would be hesitant to entertain the idea of outsourcing. After careful consideration, the Hubble team decided to operate Hubble using a single gyro, and the other functioning gyro will be kept in reserve for future use. The storied telescope has traditionally operated using 6 gyroscopes, which are part of a system that controls and determines the direction the telescope is pointed in. Over time, some of the gyros have stopped functioning, but 3 have remained operational, making no change to how the telescope operates until now. Later, one of the 3 remaining gyroscopes returned faulty readings that caused the telescope to enter safe mode multiple times and cease its observations of the universe. The team has long considered shifting the telescope to 1 gyro mode to prolong its lifespan after developing the plan more than 20 years ago. NASA's safety solution has Greg Autry questioning it. Has NASA become too risk-adverse? Talking about this, Jared Isaacman previously argued that that risk is being taken by his group with the plans to proceed with private spacewalks, no matter what. I would say, like, this is beyond logical. This is so obvious to do, said Isaacman, and if it's not, it's purely political on why it wouldn't be done. Regarding the lack of hardware, keep in mind that during the shuttle's final servicing mission on Hubble, astronauts added a ring-like piece of docking hardware to the telescope to make it easier for some future spacecraft to latch on. Thanks to that, SpaceX's Crew Dragon spacecraft would approach and dock with Hubble using this ring left. According to the national agency, the telescope is operating well. In September, it captured a stunning new image of the barred spiral galaxy, NGC 1559. As amazing as it is, there's no denying the fact that Hubble has limitations in its sensitivity and the range of wavelengths it can observe. The James Webb Space Telescope, JWST, launched in December 2021, is designed to operate mainly in the infrared spectrum, which allows it to see through cosmic dust and observe distant galaxies that are not visible to Hubble. JWST CFT features a 6.5-meter mirror, making it far more sensitive than Hubble, but not focused on visible light observations. However, while JWST expands our capabilities into infrared astronomy, there remains a significant gap in high-resolution imaging within the visible spectrum. Musk acknowledged this and called for a new telescope that to be a new visible spectrum space telescope with far larger aperture. Of course, to make it possible, it would be better if we use a large and low-cost rocket to deliver the telescope. In a tweet posted in July 2021, SpaceX's CEO suggested that the ship itself could serve as the structure for a new giant telescope with 10 times the resolution of NASA's Hubble, an indication that the billionaire still has plenty of big ideas left for the company's spacecraft. The idea of turning a Starship spacecraft into a massive space telescope was first suggested to him by Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory astrophysicist Saul Perlmutter. With Starship's 9 meters of diameter, it could accommodate a range of telescope designs, such as the James Webb Space Telescope, which could fit inside without having to fold up its 6 5-meter-wide mirror. A huge rocket like Starship is capable of launching a thicker and heavier telescope's mirrors, meaning they would be easier to manufacture and polish. In addition, spacecraft designers can add larger solar panels for additional power, which allows the spacecraft to use cheaper electronics with more redundancy. Besides that, in order to send any telescopes into deep space toward the L2 Lagrange point, where they would observe the universe far away from interference from Earth, Starship would need to be refueled in orbit. This could contaminate a telescope's sensitive mirrors, or even the telescope could be at risk of damage caused by extreme temperature swings within the time of waiting for its Starship transport to be refueled. Clearly, SpaceX will consider this possibility, but in advance, they need to demonstrate Starship's in-orbit propellant transfer in Artemis 3. Once they master this technique, SpaceX can go further with the astronomical mission. Recently, Elon Musk reposted a tweet containing 2 interesting images that show SpaceX's incredible growth rate in a decade. The first image was the cover of Aviation Week, which caught our attention with a somewhat sarcastic question: can tiny SpaceX rock Boeing? After 10 years, Aviation Week has released a new cover, and the image of SpaceX's powerful Raptors is the main theme. This is really a great example of how it started and how it's going. Meanwhile, Boeing has still struggled with Starliner's test phase, and the spacecraft's successful landing on Saturday even added to the company's humiliation. After 3 months in space, the Boeing Starliner finally undocked from the ISS and came back to Earth, but without any crew on board. It successfully landed in New Mexico on early September 7th, completing the Crew Flight Test (CFT) mission. The spacecraft landed at White Sands Space Harbor in New Mexico at 12:01 a.m. Eastern, about 6 hours after undocking from the International Space Station. The spacecraft's re-entry and descent appeared to go as planned, and the spacecraft descended under 3 parachutes before making an airbag-cushioned landing in the desert. I'm happy to report Starliner did really well today in the undock, deorbit, and landing sequence, said Steve Stitch, manager of NASA's Commercial Crew Program. Calypso's safe return adds further credence to the words of Boeing's Starliner managers, as they insist the ship is safe to take astronauts home. However, NASA appears to have no regrets about its decision to return the spacecraft without astronauts on board. I think we made the right decision to not have Butch and Suni on board, he said, given the uncertainties at the time about the performance of the thrusters. It's awfully hard for the team. It's hard for me. Sit here and have a successful landing and be in that position. But it was a test flight and we didn't have confidence in the certainty of the thruster performance. It's true. The spacecraft's propulsion system provided by Aerojet Rocketdyne clearly did not work as intended during the flight. As Starliner approached the space station in June, 5 of 28 control thrusters on Starliner's service module failed, forcing Wilmore to take manual control as ground teams sorted out the problem. Ground teams also detected 4 small helium leaks on Starliner's propulsion system soon after its launch, along with the one before launch. Although engineers recovered 4 of the 5 thrusters, this cannot able to convince NASA's decision-makers that the same problem wouldn't reappear or get worse when Starliner returns. This shows the U.S. Space Agency's serious concerns about the performance of the Starliner's thruster. Even to ensure safety, when the vehicle conducted its undocking process, engineers used Calypso's forward thrusters, avoiding the problematic thrusters that had previously malfunctioned. Starliner Starliner's departure from the station was also set to be different from what was originally planned, when it would have astronauts on board. This helps to minimize stress on the thrusters, particularly the aft-facing ones that had experienced problems in June. What a pity. Despite the efforts of the engineers, the capricious ship continued to misbehave with a couple of fresh technical problems. One of the thrusters did not fire as expected, as Starliner was backing away from the station. During the 58-second deorbit burn, 2 RCS thrusters got hotter than expected but did not fail. Controllers had changed the software to keep it from turning off thrusters. They got too hot during that burn, but didn't know if the thrusters reached temperatures that would have triggered a shutdown without the software change. One of 12 separate thrusters on the crew module also did not work in tests before re-entry. Those thrusters are a different design from those on the service module, and it wasn't clear why it failed. A redundant thruster, though, did operate normally and did not pose a problem during re-entry. Although the uncrewed journey was not perfect, NASA has said it could still be possible to certify Starliner for regular crew rotation missions, even though it didn't bring Wilmore and Williams home. But NASA's leniency still doesn't seem to have eased Boeing's resentment. The decision to fly Starliner back without its crew was an enormous slight for Boeing. In a rare public breach, Boeing said it disagreed with NASA's decision and had argued that Starliner could safely bring the crew home. As NASA and Boeing engineers discussed the plan, there was some tension in the room. NASA's Steve Stitch said in a briefing this week, "I wouldn't characterize it as heated. I wouldn't say it was a yelling, screaming kind of meeting. It was a tense technical discussion." As a result, during the live press conference on Saturday, August 24th, when NASA announced its final decision to allow Butch and Suni to return to Earth on SpaceX's Dragon capsule, Boeing representatives were absent at this event. Boeing's discontent continues. Nappy and John Shannon, the vice president of Boeing's Exploration Systems Division, were scheduled to appear at the post-landing press briefing, but neither showed up. There was no reason, but Boeing did share a message from Kay Sears, Boeing's vice president and general manager for space, intelligence, and weapons systems, and Ted Colbert, the CEO of Boeing's Defense, Space, and Security Division. While this may not have been how we originally envisioned the test flight concluding, we support NASA's decision for Starliner and are proud of how our team and spacecraft performed through this adjusted mission to safely return home uncrewed, they wrote. Additionally, Mark Nappy, vice president and program manager of Boeing's Commercial Crew Program, shared, "I want to recognize the work the Starliner teams did to ensure a successful and safe undocking, deorbit, re-entry, and landing." He said, "We will review the data and determine the next steps for the program." Boeing's confidence doesn't mean the road ahead for the Starliner program will be any easier. To make Starliner's first operational mission, or Starliner 1, happen, NASA and Boeing engineers must resolve the thruster problems and helium leaks that plagued the test flight this summer. Although they come up with several solutions, it will likely be that the next crew flight, no matter whether Starliner 1 or another test flight, will be pushed back until the end of next year, or 2026. This would reduce Boeing's chances of flying all 6 manned missions under its 2014 contract, especially with just 6 years left until the ISS is scheduled to retire. It also means the company would hard to earn an additional $1.9 billion in potential revenue from NASA. NASA awarded the company an initial $4.2 billion contract in 2014, and contract modifications since 2014 have added $400 million to the deal. So far, $2.7 billion has been paid out, while $1.9 billion remains to cover future service payments for operating flights. The $1.90 figure is still more than the $1.6 billion in losses the company has incurred on the program to date. The national agency has yet to decide whether to require Boeing to conduct another test flight to ensure safety before officially certifying Starliner for operational missions. Any answer that involves a yes or no comes down to a trade-off between safety and time. Only 3 of the 6 missions under the contract are currently confirmed to be ordered. Theoretically, NASA awards these task orders about 2 to 3 years prior to a mission's launch. As a result, Boeing can only complete a maximum of 3 missions in 6 years before the ISS retires in 2030. On the other hand, if the space agency allows Boeing to prepare for any Starliner missions. Beyond the 3 already on the books, this would conflict with NASA's current plan, as SpaceX intends to bring online a new 5th Crew Dragon for its fleet next year. The U.S. Space Agency intends to order more Dragon missions, along with 14 previous missions of SpaceX's commercial crew contracts. So they just need the handful of Starliner flights already on order, which is enough to keep the ISS fully staffed through 2030. Boeing has been silent on the certain answer for the Starliner's future. If any, it just comes from second-hand anecdotes relayed by NASA officials. Do they ultimately exit the program because it's too complicated and Boeing can't recover its investment because the other guy can do it better? Said Robert Spingarn, an analyst with Melius Research. It could happen. As SpaceX rapidly advances its Starship launch system through its test flight program, it has become apparent that it will soon be possible to voyage to the Red Planet. Elon Musk recently made a prediction about the future time frame when Starship will land on Mars. The first Starships to Mars will launch in 2 years when the next Earth-Mars transfer window opens, he wrote. At that time, however, there will be some problems. As the Mars Society president and aerospace engineer Dr. Robert Zubrin said, that a problem with Starship is that because it's so massive, it takes a great deal of facilities to be able to refuel it. So he anticipates that the few Starships that first land on Mars will stay on Mars. Elon Musk will not also rule out this possibility, so he added, these will be uncrewed to test the reliability of landing intact on Mars. The dawn of Mars colonization will require a massive amount of cargo, including vital equipment to Mars, and possibly robots with capabilities to set everything up before the first human arrival. Part of the first deliveries to Mars could include supplies such as power generators, large batteries, and solar panels that would aid in building / powering a propellant plant to refuel Starship and eventually come back to Earth. Zubrin pointed out that it would take 6 to 10 football fields of solar panels to refuel Starship within a 500-day stay on Mars. In Elon's calculation, the transport cost at present is about $1 billion per ton of useful payload to the surface of Mars. So, to build a self-sustaining city there, the acceptable cost should be $100,000 per ton, so the technology needs to be 10,000 times better. Extremely difficult, but not impossible. And if those landings go well, then the first crewed flights to Mars will be in 4 years. Of course, it is in the best scenario, but in fact, we are just able to do it after the landings are proven to be reliable. So he extends his timeline. 4 years is best case for humans. Might be 6, hopefully not 8. That means we can theoretically conduct the first manned mission to the Red Planet between 2030 and 2032. This is roughly in line with Musk's previous target of 2022, when he said manned missions to Mars would take place by 2029. But Professor Cox doesn't think that's feasible. SpaceX is a remarkable company. They did do something astonishing, which is transforming the economics of spaceflight. You never know with them, they are really good engineers. But my guess is that Musk's prediction is optimistic. Professor Cox also said he would not go to Mars tomorrow, even if SpaceX technology existed. I'd be surprised to see anyone there before the 2040s at the earliest, although I'd love to be wrong, he said. I think it's even more difficult than going to the moon was in the 1960s. Apollo was at the edge of our capabilities in the 60s. It was right at the edge of available technology, and I think Mars is perhaps even slightly beyond that at the moment. He supposed SpaceX will start sending the infrastructure within 2032, 6 years later compared to Musk's timeline. So, how about you? Do you think Musk's timeline is feasible? Please reply yes in the comments section below if you agree. Conversely, Dr. Robert Zubrin does not entirely deny the feasibility of Musk's goal. He goes into depth instead. He believes the first missions will not transport 100 passengers, and that a crew of about 20 astronauts to set up everything is safer to prepare for future arrivals of over 50 people. One of the most basic infrastructures is a landing pad, explaining that both the Moon and Mars need to have landing pads built beforehand to land a massive vehicle such as Starship. Zubrin believes landing a Starship on the Moon will not work because it will have a gigantic plume upon landing that would blow a crater. He says it wouldn't land, it will dig a crater and fall over, so that they can take the plume of the Starship on Mars is a bit less of a problem, but it is still a major problem. If that can't be resolved, he may be forced to go the mini Starship route. Zubrin stated, in order to land a Starship on the Moon, someone has to go there first and build a landing pad so that it's not blowing debris all over the place and building itself a crater to fall into. That's not a good architecture. It just isn't. And a mini version of Starship to send to Mars has a better advantage to sending it and bringing it back to Earth. It would have tremendous advantage for an exploration propulsion architecture because it wouldn't need a big base in order to refuel and come back. He, Musk, was adverse to that. He feels that developing one thing is much better than developing two things, he said. But Zubrin believes SpaceX is capable of building both versions of a Starship, a full-scale and a mini, especially seeing how quickly they develop things. There are also other issues with the Starship architecture. For instance, the Starship is a stainless steel hull, and he can do the entry from Earth orbit from that because it has a very low ballistic coefficient, which reduces the heating load. So he can do this with a steel ship without heat-resistant tiles, or in anything of this sort. But coming back from Mars, there is a much higher heating load than coming back from LEO, so he has to make specialized starships that are reinforced thermal protection. Adding that the Earth-to-Earth version of Starship will work, surface-to-surface transportation is great. Gladly. While those concerns are of some scientists, the majority are in favor. Even world-renowned physicist Dr. Michio Kaku agrees with Musk's vision. As an insurance policy, we have to make sure that humans become a two-planet species. And now, of course, Elon Musk has revived this vision by talking about a multi-planet species. Even Neil deGrasse Tyson, who calls himself one of SpaceX's biggest critics, also believes that Musk's SpaceX Starship orbit project has more merit and has a higher chance of going beyond suborbital flight. The concept of SpaceX is we want to send people to places. It is an effort to push that limit, that frontier of exploring space. And Enthusiastic Space also left a very interesting comment on this topic. I worked in the spaceflight business for 32 years. My father worked in it for 31 years. I never saw the amount of innovation in my own company and that of the rest of the industry that I have with SpaceX during all my years of working in the business. People love to criticize Musk, but it strikes me that his concept of increasing the failure rate to learn from mistakes and his avoidance of analysis paralysis is what has propelled him past the rest of the competition. Go SpaceX. A very famous example of SpaceX's unimaginable potential is their recent incredible spacewalk under the Polaris Dawn program. By breaking the common stereotype that space is only for astronauts, with Polaris, SpaceX has set a new standard, with the proviso, space is for everyone. If they can make that happen in the distant future, becoming a multi-planetary species may no longer be an anomaly for humans. To clarify, let's hear from Eric Berger, senior space editor at Ars Technica, saying about the success of Polaris commercial spacewalk. It would not surprise me to see this attitude from many, which is fine, but some perspective. When the Falcon 9 first launched in 2010, the same could be said. We've been launching into space forever, blah blah. But here's the difference. 14 years later, SpaceX is launching 100 plus times a year, something no government has ever done. One can imagine 14 years from now, dozens of people launching on Starship and taking a similar EVA in space, then on the Moon, and eventually Mars. That's why this is not overblown. This is potentially a critical step on humanity's expansion into the solar system. The time it takes to get to Mars depends on a number of factors, from the positions of Earth and Mars to the technology that gets you there. The average distance between Earth and Mars is 140 million miles, 225 million kilometers. In theory, the closest that Earth and Mars would approach each other would be when Mars is at its closest point to the Sun, perihelion, and Earth is at its farthest, aphelion. This would put the planets only 33.9 million miles, 54.6 million kilometers apart. However, this has never happened in recorded history. The closest recorded approach of the two planets occurred in 2003, when they were only 34.8 million miles, 56 million kilometers apart. According to NASA, a one-way trip to the red planet would take about 9 months. If you wanted to make it a round trip, all in all, it would take about 21 months, as you will need to wait about 3 months on Mars to make sure Earth and Mars are in a suitable location to make the trip back home.
Anyway, have you ever wondered what makes the difference between a Starship HLS and a regular Starship? Well, the difference is quite obvious. Starship HLS is basically an upper stage that will be launched on top of the Super Heavy booster. At 164 feet, 50 meters in height, it dwarfs its predecessor, the Apollo lunar module, and even the regular Starship, especially in the case Elon Musk plans to stretch the height of the rocket in Starship's later versions. HLS offers a spacious crew cabin for the astronauts and a massive 100-ton claimed payload capability. Starship has a stainless steel structure and tank construction. The Starship will also have a thermal protection system against the harsh conditions of atmospheric re-entry. This will include hexagonal ceramic tiles that will be used on the windward side of Starship. The Starship HLS variant is being designed to stay on and around the Moon. Therefore, both the heat shield and air brakes, integral parts of the main Starship design, are not included on Starship HLS, as the vehicle will not return to Earth. Thanks to the removal of the heat shield, the Starship HLS will be painted white. White surfaces reflect nearly 100% of incoming solar radiation, which reduces the rate at which propellant boils off. The variant will use high-thrust oxygen and methane-fueled thrusters located mid-body on Starship HLS during the final tens of meters of the terminal lunar descent and landing to avoid plume impingement problems with the lunar regolith. SpaceX intends to use the same high-thrust RCS thrusters for liftoff from the lunar surface. The majority of Artemis 3's powered descent will be conducted by the Raptor engines. However, these 6 powerful engines would likely generate severe plume surface interactions during landing, excavating large quantities of rock and regolith from beneath the lander. Because there won't be any Mechazilla systems on the moon base anytime soon, the lunar Starship will be equipped with 4 landing legs. This requires the Starship's super heavy booster to generate enough thrust to cancel out the drag from these 4 protrusions. According to NASA, deployable solar arrays of some sort are in development for the lunar lander. These arrays will serve as the lander's primary source of energy in space and on the lunar surface. In addition, there will be other parts such as crew displays, crew elevators, hot gas reaction control systems, solar array deployment, thermal and micrometeoroid debris protection tiles, landing legs, docking mechanisms, landing software and sensors, and medical systems. Based on the above presentation, we can clearly see that Starship HLS not only inherits the most modern features of Starship, but is also upgraded to suit the moon landing mission. Its modernity has caught the eyes of a research team, and they later proposed the idea of using this variant to create a lunar base. This proposal is the work of a team from multiple universities and scientific institutes across Europe, all of whom are members of the Space Studies program at the International Space University in Strasbourg, France. The team was inspired to create a concept that would enable the rapid and cost-effective construction of permanent lunar infrastructure, while also allowing crews to address the challenges of living and working in the lunar environment. The plan calls for using the Starship's HLS as a habitable volume for astronauts and construction crews. These crews will live in these habitats for 2 to 3 months, while assembling the infrastructure with robotic assistance for a permanent human presence. The main advantage of this proposal is that it allows astronauts to bring their habitat and necessary supplies with them. During the mission, one crewed Starship and the other for supplies will fly to the moon and deploy a series of remotely operated robots that will transition the 2 Starships into a horizontal position. The astronauts will then convert the interior into habitable volumes, add multi-layer insulation, MLI, and deploy all the essential operations equipment. At the same time, the robots will cover the base with a protective layer of regolith. The main challenge of our concept was transitioning the vehicle to a horizontal position, said the team. While on Earth, the Starship cannot support its structure being vertical, the 1/6 gravity and the large pressure difference will certainly assist in maintaining the vehicle's shape. If this is not enough, the regolith beneath the vehicle will be piled in a way that supports it, and additional supports can be installed inside the habitat. Once complete, the base will have all the amenities it needs to deal with the hazards of the lunar environment. The hull, additional MLI, and regolith layer will limit the astronauts' exposure to radiation to within tolerable limits. The astronauts will follow a schedule that limits their lunar extravehicular activities to 6 hours a day and maintain a rigorous exercise program consisting of resistance and high-intensity interval training. And that just about wraps it up for today's episode. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification feature so you don't miss any space-important updates. Your support is our driving force to continue delivering high-quality content. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you next time.